Let me introduce the presenter of this class, Julia Anderson. Julia has a master's degree in history with an education emphasis and is an accredited genealogist and accredited genealogist lecturer. She is a research specialist at the Family Search Library on the United States and Canada team. And with that, we'll turn the time over to Julia.
Thank you. Welcome to the class. Military pension files are some of my favorite historical records because they're often filled with vital information and details that can bring the stories of your ancestors to life. My objectives today are to explain the historical background of U.S. military pension records, describe the valuable genealogical information that they may contain, and demonstrate how to locate pension files for your ancestors and use them to answer your research questions. So first, I'd like to establish some historical context. What exactly is a pension? Generally, it's a sum of money paid monthly or yearly as a retirement benefit or supplemental income. Military pensions were paid to veterans or their family members by the government. There were three basic categories: invalid or disability pensions, service pensions, and widow's pensions. Because specific benefits provided by pensions were based on acts of Congress, they changed periodically, making it important to understand the timeline of pension laws. Shortly after signing the Declaration of Independence, one of the first acts passed by the Continental Congress was a national pension law. Over the next century, the laws continued to evolve, and every time Congress passed a new pension act, more people qualified and applied for those pensions. Today, I'll be discussing details about pension records that were created for those who served in the following: the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, various Indian wars, the Mexican War, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, and the Philippine Insurrection. The Revolutionary War was the first war that involved the United States as an independent body rather than as a collection of British colonies. And to entice men to enlist in the war effort, soldiers and sailors were promised benefits and pensions by both the individual states and the federal government. The Pension Act that was passed on August 26, 1776, provided for injured soldiers and sailors who could not earn a living due to their military service. Then, less than 2 years later, a congressional resolution passed on May 15, 1778, provided half pay for all officers and an $80 bonus for enlisted men who finished the war. This was to entice soldiers to continue fighting rather than returning home at the end of their short contracts. The War Act of 1818 provided relief for Revolutionary War veterans who were not disabled but who had financial need. Then, in 1832, a new law offered full pay for life for officers and enlisted men who served more than 2 years, and partial pay for those who served between 6 months and 2 years. New laws create new records. Every time the government introduced more options, those who qualified, and many who did not, applied to receive their share of the public funds. Before 1800, these military records were kept by the War Department. Now, this is important to know because, unfortunately, a fire at the War Department on November 8, 1800, destroyed all Revolutionary War pension and bounty land warrant applications that were submitted up until that time. But it's not all bad news because most pensions for the Revolutionary War were granted after 1800 as laws changed, allowing more people to qualify. Those people on the pension rolls also had to reapply periodically because of changes in the laws. Genealogically significant documents often found in Revolutionary War pension files include military records like commissions, certificates, discharges, and muster rolls, land deeds and grants, probate records like personal wills or guardianship papers, vital records like marriage certificates and pages from family Bibles, manuscripts, including excerpts from diaries, journals, and letters, and even original newspaper clippings might be included. Not every pension file contains all of these, but they usually contain several types of records. Each survivor's pension file is stored in a 10 by 14-inch envelope at the National Archives. The envelopes can contain anywhere from 1 to 200 pages of information, but the average is 30 pages. Every file should contain the official pension application, evidence of the soldier's identity, and proof of his military service. It will also include forms showing government action on the application and whether a pension was granted or the application was rejected. Here's an example of what the outer envelope of a typical Revolutionary War pension file looks like. You can see the name of the soldier, Sylvanus Brimhall, the location of his service, Massachusetts, and the type of pension he had. S stands for survivor. This is Sylvanus's declaration, which outlines his service in the Revolution, including his various enlistment dates and companies, battles in which he participated, his birth date and place, and the date of his previous pension applications. I'm going to show you just a few highlights from this document. Sylvanus carefully chronicled his entire service in the war, including each time he enlisted. These included December 1775 at Plymouth, Massachusetts, May 1777, April 1778, May 1779, and June 1780. He also outlined the places where he served and what his duties were. It says he marched through Hanover into Roxbury and from there on to Cambridge. At Cambridge, he kept guard on Winter Hill. Then in March 1776, he marched through Norwich to New London and sailed to New York, where he guarded the city and built forts. Other places he served included Albany, Fort Ticonderoga, Fort George, Fort Anne, Montreal, Mount Independence, Providence, Newport, Newtown, and Boston. He even helped to defend Boston Harbor. Toward the end of his declaration, Sylvanus gave the following information about himself. I was born at Abington, Massachusetts on the 15th of March, 1758. I now live at Hardwick and have lived there and at Barr nearly all of the time since the Revolutionary War. He also stated that he applied for and received a pension under the Act of 1818, but his name was stricken off on account of property. And now that means he had too much property to receive a pension. At the very bottom of the deposition, Sylvanus signed his name. So Sylvanus mentioned that he had a previous pension revoked because he owned too much property. An act passed on May 1st, 1820, stated that every pensioner receiving payments under the 1818 Act and all new pensioners had to prove they needed financial assistance. If their proof wasn't satisfactory, their names would be removed from the pension rolls. A few years later, under the Act of March 1st, 1823, these former pensioners were allowed to reapply if they could show they currently needed assistance. Now keep in mind that this was 42 years after the end of the Revolutionary War. So this paper here was the declaration of the property Sylvanus owned in 1820, from which it was deemed he did not need a pension. Now this document includes information of great genealogical significance. And this is a description of his family, his occupation, and his inability to provide for his household. Note that he was trying to convince the government that he needed assistance. Sylvanus stated, "My family consists of a wife named Lucy, aged 32, and 3 children, Lucy C. Brimhall, aged 9, Elbridge G. Brimhall, aged 6, and Susan Ann, aged 3 months. My occupation is that of a cooper, which my age and infirmities render me unable to pursue with profit or advantage. I am in debt $344, more than I have due me." Sylvanus did apply again under the Pension Act of 1823, and his property inventory at that time was much sparser. It states that his land was sandy and poor, with a poor house and barn, and his 2 wagons were old. Veterans' widows were also allowed to apply for pensions based on their husband's service, but their applications had to include additional family information, like proof of marriage, children, and the death of their spouse, as well as other details. Of great significance, a widow's pension application may give her age, residence, maiden name, marriage date and place, and specifics about her husband's death. Some widows' pension applications include a copy of a marriage record from the town clerk, a clergyman, or a justice of the peace. Sometimes family record pages from Bibles and other books were also submitted. If a widow remarried, information on her second husband and marriage may also be included in the pension file. Many times our brick wall research problems can be broken down once we locate a woman's maiden name. Or if a woman we're researching suddenly disappears, it could be because she married again. This information is invaluable when researching our family history. This is what a Revolutionary War widow's pension looks like. It's identical to a survivor's pension, except the widow's name is listed under the soldier's name, and the certificate number has a leading W for widow instead of a leading S for survivor. Even though this pension file is for Nancy Berry, whose pension was granted in 1843, other documents in the file include her husband Robert's original declaration for pension, which he was awarded in 1832, 3 years before his death. The declaration includes a thorough explanation of his service in the war, including his being taken prisoner by the British and fighting at the Siege of Charleston, and it has his original signature at the bottom. Nancy Berry's pension file also includes her declaration, which states that her name was Nancy Berry. She was 76 years old on June 4th, 1845. She lived in Lincoln County, North Carolina. She was the widow of Robert Berry, who fought in the War of the Revolution and whom she married in 1791, and who died on May 23, 1835. Nancy signed with her mark, showing that she may have been unable to write due to illiteracy or perhaps infirmity. The file also has many affidavits from Nancy's friends and neighbors stating that they knew her to be married to her husband and that she remained a widow after his death, which were requirements for receiving a pension at that time. Sometimes pension files can contain very interesting tidbits of information. This deposition states that Robert Berry's oldest child, John, was, quote, bit with a mad dog and got over it, end quote, prior to Robert's second marriage. Now let's take a look at pensions from the War of 1812. Like the Revolutionary War pensions after 1820, applicants were required to provide the government with proof of eligibility. This may have been a hassle for the applicants, but it is really a blessing for genealogists. These files may include original records such as pages extracted from family Bibles, marriage certificates, photographs, military records, and more. Pension laws kept changing. To be awarded a pension before 1871, the veteran or widow could not be capable of earning a living. Then, after the Act of February 14, 1871, a soldier had to have served at least 60 days and have been honorably discharged. Widows could apply if they were married to the soldier before the war's official end on February 17, 1815. Then, by the Act of 1878, a soldier only had to have served at least 14 days, and these pensions were available to veterans, their widows, and their minor children. Documents you might find in a War of 1812 pension file include many of the same types of documents included in Revolutionary War pension files. You could see family records like pages from family Bibles, marriage certificates, photographs, and letters, military records like discharge papers, church records with vital information, land records, and affidavits from family, friends, neighbors, and other associates. This is the outer envelope for a War of 1812 pension file. You can see at the bottom in red ink that this application was rejected. That does not mean that the file won't help you, though. Often the rejected applications contain more information than those that were granted right away, because the individuals had to send in additional information to be reconsidered. One of the gems in this file is Samuel Earle's original discharge certificate from 1815. It even comes complete with fancy official artwork. One difference between Revolutionary War pension applications and those from the War of 1812 is that for the War of 1812, there were pre-printed forms for the applicants to use to submit their claims. Here you can see a form for a survivor's pension and a form for a widow's pension. It often helps to know what the documents look like so you can identify them later. The next set of wars that included military pensions were the so-called Indian Wars. These battles included various campaigns between the United States and the Native Americans between 1817 and 1898. Those who could apply were the veterans themselves and their widows if they had not remarried after the veteran's death. The series of Indian Wars pensions contained about 35,000 applications, both those that were approved and those that were rejected. Like the War of 1812 pension files, these files generally include the application and original envelope with a brief of the case prepared by the Pension Bureau, a statement of the veteran's service supplied by the War or Navy Department, affidavits, depositions, medical records, manuscripts such as correspondence from interested persons, vital records, and other documentary evidence that was submitted in support of the claim. Genealogical evidence in these documents can vary, but you can expect to find the soldier's or sailor's name, age, residence, date and place of birth, and records of his military service. These pension application files also contain family and personal history questionnaires, which should list the maiden name of the veteran's wife, the date and place of their marriage, and the name of the person who performed the marriage ceremony, the name of the veteran's former wife, if he had one, and the date and place of her death or their divorce, and the names and birth dates of living children. Pension claims were disapproved or rejected if the service of the veteran couldn't be verified by the right government department, if the injury, disability, or death was unrelated to military service, or if the soldier deserted or was dishonorably discharged. Claims for pensions were abandoned if the veteran died and left no dependents. Next came the Mexican War, also called the Mexican-American War. The Mexican War was fought between the United States and Mexico between 1846 and 1848. Applications for pensions were submitted by veterans or their widows who had not remarried, and about 36,000 individuals applied for pensions based on their service. A typical Mexican War pension file includes similar documents and information as those for the Indian Wars because they covered the same time period. These are the application, original jacket and a brief of the case, a statement of military service, affidavits, depositions, medical records, manuscripts like personal letters, vital records such as birth and marriage records, and sometimes even more information. This is the image of the envelope for a Mexican War pension file for a widow whose husband served in the Mormon Battalion. You can see that it includes her name, Mercy Morris, the soldier's name, Thomas Morris, his rank, which was private, Company B, and regiment, Mormon Volunteers, the amount of the pension, which was $8 per month, and when it was granted, November 7th, 1887, about 40 years after the conflict. The pension is stamped with the words dropped and dead, showing that the pensioner was deceased and would no longer be kept on the pension rolls. The next conflict for which individuals received pensions was the Civil War, or the War between the states. The Civil War was fought on American soil between the United States in the north and the Confederate States in the south between 1861 and 1865. 3 million soldiers and sailors served in the conflict, which cost the lives of more than 600,000 participants. Casualties, which included deaths, wounds, injuries, sickness, capture, or other losses, were approximately 1.5 million. The majority of these veterans and their widows who had not remarried, over 2 million of them, applied for pensions. Pension records for this war are unique because where they're located and what they contain depends on what side of the conflict the soldier served. Like those for the War of 1812, Indian Wars, and the Mexican War, a typical Civil War pension file includes the application, original jacket, brief of the case, a statement of military service, medical records, vital records, affidavits and other evidence, and manuscripts such as letters. These documents can be filled with genealogically valuable information. The pension application files document the name, age, residence, and date and place of birth of soldiers and sailors. In addition, information about the nature and extent of a veteran's military service and disability, if any, is included, as well as family information, especially for widows' pensions. The first law for Civil War pensions was passed on July 22, 1861, only a few months after the war began. An act to grant pensions for those with war-related disabilities passed a year later on July 14, 1862. These laws only applied to those who fought for the Union. Veterans who fought in the war for the Confederacy could also receive pensions, but the rules were different. The veteran was only eligible to apply for a pension to the state in which he lived, even if he had served in a unit from a different state. Generally, an applicant was eligible for a pension only if he was destitute or disabled, because states that had been part of the Confederacy had very heavy financial burdens after the war. Generally, veterans could apply first, with later provisions made for their widows. Not all Confederate states began offering pensions right after the war, as you can see from this timeline. It was a gradual process that was not complete until well into the 20th century. If your Confederate veteran suddenly moved from one state to another, it might have been to get on the pension rolls at his new residence. So many pensioners applied for pensions after the Civil War that pension offices were often overwhelmed and had to have a police presence to maintain order. 33 years after the end of the Civil War, the United States became involved in the Spanish-American War. This conflict lasted less than a year, from April to December 1898. In fact, most of the fighting was over in about 3 months, before many soldiers and sailors ever made it to the front. In spite of this, over 280,000 sailors, Marines, and soldiers actually served in the war, and many of them applied for pensions. The records for this war are generally more thorough and accurate than the records for previous wars. Documents found in Spanish-American War pension files usually include the application forms, proof of marriage, proof of children's births, a summary of the veteran's military service, and death certificates. The last war of the 19th century and the first of the 20th century was the Philippine Insurrection, which is also the final conflict we're going to cover today. This war was fought between the United States and the Philippine Islands and lasted from 1899 to 1902. Another name for the conflict was the Philippine-American War. It began when the Treaty of Paris made the Philippines into a territory of the United States following the Spanish-American War. The Filipino people, however, wanted to be independent and resisted this new government. Pensions for veterans of the Philippine Insurrection were first granted in 1922. Like those for the Spanish-American War, these pension files usually include the application forms, proof of marriage, proof of children's births, a summary of military service, and death certificates. By the turn of the 20th century, the pension rolls had become enormous. This political cartoon from 1898 highlights the fact that there was significant pension fraud and shows that the pension office had to be diligent to ensure that only those qualified for pensions received them. This affected the information required from them in the applications, and although it unfortunately led to many deserving would-be pensioners having their applications rejected, the extra information can be a boon for genealogists. Each application has the potential to break down brick walls, establish relationships, and identify lost ancestors. So now that we've briefly covered when and why military pensions were created and discussed what valuable genealogical information they may contain, you may be asking, did my ancestor apply for a pension? One way to begin answering this question is to look for clues about your ancestor's military service. These can be found in many common genealogical records. Death certificates are a great place to look. These often included a question about whether the deceased was a veteran. Census records. In 1890, the United States had a special veterans census. The 1910 census asked if the individual was a Union or Confederate veteran, and the 1930 census asked if the individual was a veteran and what war they served in. Headstones may contain information about a military unit in which the deceased served. You also always want to check newspapers. Obituaries, notable events, reunions, or special awards may have been memorialized in a local paper, sometimes many years after the war. Look for photos of your ancestors wearing uniforms or sporting weapons or other battle paraphernalia. And look for family stories that tell about your ancestors serving in a war. County histories often contain biographical sketches of war veterans and their family members, and soldiers often wrote to loved ones and received letters from home. If you can identify when and where your ancestor served, especially what unit he was in, that will be very helpful in identifying the right individual in these records. Often we may think our ancestors had unusual names, but chances are you'll find more than one Ebenezer Wilson or Sylvanus Brimhall who served in the military. After locating evidence of your ancestors' military service, it's time to check the pension indexes. Even if you know your ancestor served in one of these conflicts, it's important to remember that not every single person who served applied for a pension. Many indexes are available online at Family Search, Ancestry, Fold3, and the websites of state libraries and archives. The Family Search Library and other repositories also have printed index books in their reference sections. I find that one easy way to access the indexes is through the Family Search Research Wiki. The page entitled United States Military Online Genealogy Records has links to many different collections which are separated by conflict. For example, the section on records of the Revolutionary War includes a link to U.S. Revolutionary War Pension and Bounty Land Warrant Applications Index on Family Search. Of all the records in this list, this is the one that refers to a pension index. If I click on the link, it takes me to a search page that looks like this, where I can enter the name of my ancestor and some identifying information. I entered the name of Sylvanus Brimhall, and this page came up. It tells me that Sylvanus received a pension for service in the Revolutionary War, that he served from the state of Massachusetts, and that his pension file number is S45619. It also says I can view the image at fold3.com. Fold3 is a subscription website that specializes in historical military records, and it is available for guests to use for free at the Family Search Library, in Family Search centers, and at many public libraries. You can also pay for a subscription to view the images at home. If we return to the Family Search Wiki page about United States military online genealogy records, we can see that there are links to pension indexes for each war that we have discussed today. Here we have indexes to pension files for the Indian Wars, the War of 1812, the Mexican War, and even a special collection for records of the Mormon Battalion, which unit served in the Mexican War. This is the entry for the Civil War. There are many options listed, such as the General Index to Pension Files, 1861 to 1934. It also has a link to a separate page for the Confederate pension records. The Confederate pension records page on the Research Wiki has links for each state that offered Confederate pensions. To search for pensions granted between 1861 and 1934, the easiest index to use is the United States General Index to Pension Files. It is available on Family Search, and the link is in your handout. If I search for Ebenezer Wilson, I get several options. After identifying the one I want, I can select either the record icon or the camera icon. The record icon takes me to this page, and the camera icon takes me to the image of the actual pension file. This is the index card, and it's the information I need to record so I can get the actual file. So how do I find the pension file? The location of the files depends on the particular war in which your ancestor participated. Pension files for the Revolutionary War are digitized and available on fold3.com. Files for the War of 1812 are in the process of being digitized and available on Fold3. So far, the collection is 88% complete with over 1.4 million files. The project is going alphabetically from A to Z, and they are currently working on the surnames that start with the letter S. The remainder of the files are only available at the National Archives and Records Administration, which is abbreviated as NARA, and that is located in Washington, D.C. The digitized images for this war on Fold3 are free for anyone to view. If the files have been digitized, NARA staff will not pull them for you at the archives because they are so fragile. They will just tell you to look at them online. Pension files for the Indian Wars are only available at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. The same goes for files of the Mexican War, except for the Mormon Battalion pension files, which are digitized on Fold3. For the Civil War, Confederate files are kept at the state level, and some are digitized on Ancestry and Family Search. Pension files for Union soldiers are only available at the National Archives, but some widows' pensions are digitized on Fold3. Other pension files may be digitized and available online on various websites, but not as an entire collection. For the Spanish-American War, pension files are only available at the National Archives, with some exceptions, and the same is true for the Philippine Insurrection. One of the main exceptions to this is if the pensioner was alive in 1928, their pension files were kept by the Veterans Administration and then moved to the National Personnel Record Center in St. Louis, Missouri. This is the Fold3 website. It is a division of Ancestry and focuses on military records. From this main search page, you can select the conflict you want to research. If I wanted to look for someone who served in the Revolutionary War, I would select that option from the menu. This is the search page for the Revolutionary War. I entered the name of my ancestor, Sylvanus Brimhall, and received 7 results. 3 of the results mention pension files for Sylvanus. This one, and this one. 2 of those show me that there are multiple pages, denoting an entire pension file. So the first is 35 pages and the next is 19. The third entry gives me no page numbers and is only an index card. I would want to carefully read and analyze both of the pension files to determine which, if either, is for my particular Sylvanus Brimhall. And we always hope there's enough identifying information within the file to determine that. To find War of 1812 pension files, I would follow the same procedure as for the Revolutionary War. Here I've selected the War of 1812 from the main menu. For records that are not digitized and published online, you will need to order copies of the original records from the National Archives or visit the archives in person. Pension files are in Record Group 15, Records of the Veterans Administration. And the website for the archives is simply archives.gov. From the main page, you'll want to select Research Our Records. On the next page, toward the bottom, is an option to order copies of records. That's what you'll want to select. Researchers are able to order records online and receive electronic copies via email or paper copies by U.S. mail. The form for military pension applications is National Archives Trust Fund, or NATF, Form 85. You can download the form, fill it out, and then mail it to the address given on the form's instructions, or you can order online if you set up an account. The current cost for pension files for the Civil War and later is $80 for the first 100 pages, then 70 cents for each additional page. If there are more pages than allowed by the National Archives Trust Fund, the researcher will receive a block of pages along with a quote for the cost of the remaining pages. Files from before the Civil War only cost $55. This is what the NATF Form 85 looks like. It's accompanied by several pages of instructions, and you need to make sure to fill it out completely from the information contained in the record indexes. It can take anywhere from 2 to 12 months or even longer to receive files from the National Archives, depending on the number of current requests and staff availability. You can also go through a third party and receive the files much more quickly. For Confederate pension files, you will need to request them from the state archives where your ancestor was living when he or she applied for the pension. You can figure out their residence by searching census and other records. Contact information for the state archives is available on the National Archives website, as well as on the Family Search Research Wiki. So once you've determined that your ancestor served in the military, you've located their name in an index that shows they did receive a pension or applied for one, and downloaded or ordered and received the pension application file, the next step is using the records in your research. In order to get the most out of these pension files, we need to read, study, analyze, and evaluate them. Then we must resolve any conflicts and reach a conclusion. To read the record, first, I like to read through the entire pension file to get the big picture. Read the records carefully. You don't want to skip any details because often the genealogical gold nuggets you're looking for are hiding amongst the less pertinent information. Next, I usually transcribe or copy word for word every document in the file because this makes searching for pieces of evidence and correlating them much easier. If I can't tell exactly what a document says, it helps to consult charts and compare handwriting on different pages to figure out difficult words. Then I also always make note of every person mentioned in the file and try to figure out their relationship to the applicant, including friends, associates, neighbors, witnesses, clergy, attorney, and other people. Next is to study the record. Make sure you understand the purpose of each document contained in the file, who created it, and why it was included there. The pages are usually out of chronological order, so it can be very beneficial to put them in order from earliest to latest. If you can see the progression of the applicant's claim, it can highlight gaps in the records and lead you to other sources. Next, create a timeline of events included in the file. Add other information to your timeline from previous research. It's also important to compare information on each document, checking to see if it agrees or conflicts with previous research or other information in the file itself. Finally, try to identify everyone mentioned in the records. This involves looking up those individuals in other places, like census records and vital records. Try to determine their relationship to the pension applicant. Next, analyze the record. This involves asking many questions, such as, who created this document? What does it say? Who is it about? What is it about? And is there conflicting evidence? After reading, studying, and analyzing the records, it is important to evaluate them and draw conclusions. Helpful questions for evaluating include, what does the information in the record mean? How reliable is the information? What kind of evidence does it provide? And where does the information lead me next? When resolving conflicting evidence, it is important to focus on the best records. These are typically original sources with primary information. Then you'll want to compare and correlate that information with other documented evidence. Using charts and forms can greatly help in organizing the data and deciding what information makes the most sense. In drawing conclusions, try to determine why the veteran or his widow applied for a pension, whether the pension was approved or rejected and why, what relationships are stated in the pension application, and what avenues of future research have opened up with this new evidence. It's very helpful to write a research report or summary to show your thought process and explain to others how you reached your conclusions based on the evidence. This will also help you if you need to step away from your research for a while. Then, when you return to it, you can pick right up where you left off instead of trying to remember everything. This brings us to the end of today's presentation. In summary, I have explained the historical background of military pension records, described the valuable genealogical information pension files may contain, and demonstrated how to find pension files for your ancestors and how to use them by thoroughly reading, studying, analyzing, and evaluating the records. Thank you for attending this presentation. Now we have a few minutes for questions, and if we don't have time to answer your specific research question, I would invite you to schedule a free 20-minute online genealogy consultation with one of the Family Search Library's research specialists. The link to do that is in your handout. So thank you so much, and I'll turn the time back over to our moderator, Alyssa.
Perfect. Thank you, Julia. That was a wonderful presentation, and I hope everyone learned a lot because I know I did. So we invite everyone in the audience today to take a survey and provide feedback for this class, and we will post that link into the comment section. And we do have time for some questions. And if you have a question about military pension files, please post them into the comment section. And we only have a couple of minutes to answer them, and we might not have time to answer everything. But like Julia said, you can sign up for a free online consultation. So we did have one question from Vicky on StreamYard. She was asking, is it possible to locate a Civil War pension record by pension certificate number only?
So you'll need that certificate number to order it from the National Archives if it's for the Union. I highly suggest looking in the indexes and look for the name of the person and then compare it to the certificate number. It's actually filed by the application number, not the certificate number, but you can use that certificate number to make sure you are looking at the right file.
That's a good tip, especially since you mentioned it might take a couple months to get that file. So want to make sure you're getting the right one.
Yeah, definitely look at those index cards. Hopefully you have the name of the pensioner.
Mm-hmm. So Carol on Facebook is asking, are we allowed to take photos of the NARA records?
So they actually send you a digital copy if that's how you order it. And so it's already photographed by NARA. So you will have digital images already. If they send you a hard copy of the records, I don't even know if they still actually do that. Then I'm sure you're welcome to scan those in. But I think it's just easier to get the digital file in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. We're not having any other questions come in, but we'll give everyone a second to ask them since we don't want to miss out on anyone.
These are such fun records because you can really find stories about your ancestor within the files. There's things I've learned about my ancestors and people that I've been researching that I would never have guessed. And I have broken down brick walls because I found maiden names of people. I've also discovered that who I thought the parents of my ancestor was not correct, but the pension file actually states who the parents were. And there's so much you can find in there, and you never really know what it's going to be. It's just kind of like getting a birthday surprise when you get those files to read.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's so amazing to see what little key things we can find in these records that I don't think many people really look at. So it's a great kind of hidden gem in the genealogy world.
Definitely. And I used to worry about the cost of ordering the files, but I have never been disappointed. I know some of the pension files are only one page, and that could probably be disappointing. And that happened when the disability was so obvious and the pension office knew right away that the person needed a pension and they just approved it. And so you just get the application, but that has the person's name and their age and their military service and those other things. So you still get details, and you can take that information and use it as a springboard for future research, which is really, really valuable.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I love that. A springboard. That's a great imagery of that. Yeah, we're still not getting any questions, but we are getting a lot of comments about how wonderful that this presentation was. And just a reminder to everyone watching, this is being recorded. So go to Facebook or YouTube or X, and on the Family Search and Roots Tech pages, we will have the recording available as soon as we end the live stream. So we really encourage you to watch it again because it's so many little details in this presentation that you'll want to come back to. Okay, I'll give everyone another minute or so, and then we'll probably just wrap it up a couple minutes early. But we just want to make sure that we're not going to miss out on anyone asking a question while we have Julia here. While we're waiting for questions, oh, we got one. As soon as I said that, it came in. Martha on Facebook is asking, will costs likely go up to order files?
I really can't say, but it seems logical that they will go up. They haven't been raised for a while, though. It's been pretty steady for the last few years. So
it's really good.
Yeah, it's a good deal. And
So
I found
get those right now.
yeah, going through a third party, what you do is you hire them and they go to the archives for you, have the records pulled, they'll digitize them for you and send them to you. And often it's much, much quicker and the cost is similar. So that's another option that you can use if you need the files sooner than you think NARA could turn around and get them to you.
That's a great tip. Thanks for sharing that.